What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here, joined by Paul Bretl, the master when it comes to covering all things green and gold. Paul, how are you today, buddy?
I'm excellent, Aaron. I appreciate the kind words and always happy to be here talking Packers with you.
Well, it's been a while, and I did want to kind of recap OTAs because you've been there, all three practices that have been made available to the media, which let's start there. How funny is it that, we've clearly got some kind of idea now looking at the young guys, the rookies, that's always kind of the main draw, right? When the offseason work gets opened up to the media and the public. Has anyone jumped out to you as far as, okay, we see their college tape, we see their college scouting reports, we kind of break these guys down against college competition. It can be another thing when you see them kind of on the field at the NFL level with NFL competition. Has anyone really jumped out to you, or is it too early to tell?
I would say the physical traits of Edrian Cooper. I mean, we've heard since Gutekunst drafted him through the pre-draft process, Packers have used the term or words fast and physical to describe what they're looking for at the defense. And man, he is absolutely that. There was a play during Tuesday's practice. The Packers were running a few toss plays to the right on consecutive plays, and his ability to diagnose what was coming, shoot the gap, and then just immediately be in the backfield. Like I'm talking, it was like that. And he was in the backfield making a play on Josh Jacobs. Like you hear about it all. You can watch the college tape, but seeing it in person, that was my first wow moment watching Edrian Cooper live going, oh, that's what everyone's talking about. That's what this defense is getting with him out there.
Right. Let's go through the position groups, right? And we can talk about each one, maybe not too in depth, but we can look at the guys and see what you've seen through your eyes. Because look, you are the eyes and ears of Packers fans, literally worldwide. We got people checking in from all over the globe who want to get every little morsel of everything that happens at every single Packers practice. And obviously you are there. Let's start at the quarterback position. Obviously, Jordan Love is the marquee name. He's about to get paid. But what about the other two guys? What about Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt? We know Pratt clearly a bit, I think, I'm not going to say a surprise, but the fact that he lasted as long as he did and the Packers swiped him there late in the draft, has he looked the part? How have he and Sean Clifford looked so far through OTAs?
Yeah, Pratt's had his moments. His best practice was the second one. The Packers went through a 2-minute drill at the end, and that was the first live portion, like 11 on 11 full speed that they have had. Most of these OTAs have been individual drills or a little bit quicker than walk-through pace. So that was his first time 11 on 11 full speed during this OTA process, and he led the offense down the field. I liked how quick and decisive he was in his decision making. We heard Brian Gutekunst describe his big arm. Man, you could see that even on 10-yard routes where the receiver's sitting down, he is just zipping it in there. So I thought that was really impressive, again, considering it was his first time in that 11 on 11 capacity. And a little peek behind the curtains, I talked to him after that practice, and he said he had about an hour between when they were in the classroom saying, all right, we're going through 2-minute drill today. Here's what we're running, to learn it, to see it with the first and second offenses going through, and then go out there and implement. So again, that peek behind the curtain gives it a little extra impressiveness to the performance out there. Now, Sean Clifford, again, he's looked very steady, very comfortable, as you'd expect. And I know a lot of times when we see a new draft pick come in, we think, oh, they're gonna take over the reins. But as I've said before, I've written about the Packers drafting Pratt was more so about going back to an organizational philosophy of drafting and developing the quarterback position, more so than it was Gutekunst and LaFleur saying, we got to find someone to challenge Sean Clifford. They're very, very high on Sean Clifford. Tom Clements has said that he expects a big jump from him in the second season, and that throughout practices last year, as he's running the scout team, they could see his progression taking place. So don't forget about Sean Clifford in all of this.
Absolutely. Clearly looked really good in preseason last year. I'm excited to see those guys get on the field in camp, and then especially those preseason games, because that's your opportunity, right? As a backup to an entrenched starter like Jordan Love. Looking at the running back position, Josh Jacobs, the big headline this offseason as far as a free agent signing, bringing back A.J. Dillon on the tender. And then you got Marshawn Lloyd and Emmanuel Wilson. Wilson's kind of the forgotten man, right? I know we can't really tell much when they're running around in shorts and helmets, but what do you think? What are Wilson's odds here? Because I can't imagine, barring some complete meltdown / disaster from Lloyd in camp, that he's not going to make this roster. So then it comes down to me between A.J. Dillon and Emmanuel Wilson. I don't think it's really that fair a fight, because I think Dillon is clearly the better player. So, like, is that much of an uphill battle in your eyes?
I think so. I think right as of now, it's like you said, it's an uphill battle for Wilson, and he's the odd man out. I mean, even just looking at the early rotations at the running back position, and AJ Dillon, they need more juice. They need more burst from him. I think he averaged 3.4 yards per rush last season, but there's something to be said for his reliability and
Yes.
just the well-rounded skill set he brings as a ball carrier, pass blocker, a pass catcher, and knowing the Matt LaFleur offense. Like if that's your third running back, a ton of value in that, and someone who you can use him in a variety of ways. And AJ Dillon, he said, it's that time of the year, but he said he's in the best shape of his life. And he looks like it. Like he looks slimmed down, but still has that AJ Dillon muscle that we all see. And there was one, they were going through pass catching drills. It was just a quick in breaker and then turn up field. And when he turned up field, it looked like there was some extra juice there. So if he can bring that burst with the ball in his hands to, again, that well-rounded skill set, there's absolutely value there. There's a spot that Matt LaFleur can carve out for him, whether it's third downs in pass protection, whether it's specific run blocking downs, whether they want to use him as a blocker, whatever it may be. So I know AJ Dillon, with the addition of Lloyd and Jacobs, again, maybe someone who's forgotten about a little bit, but I absolutely see a path for him to make his way onto this roster once again. And as of now, that would leave Emmanuel Wilson as the odd man out.
I would think so. Then we get to the probably the most exciting position group in this on this roster. It's the wide receiver group. It's so deep, so talented. And it's funny because I know that obviously last year with all the rookies and the time it took for them to develop and get on the same page, everything I've read, and I'm sure you've heard from the guys in the locker room, sure feels like it's night and day as far as this point of the offseason, where last year there was a lot of assimilation going on, and this year they really kind of hit the ground running.
Yeah, it's nuts just how quickly things can change in the NFL. After each of these practices, I go through and do my observations, takeaway articles. And through the first two practices, I'm on like bullet point number 7, 8, 9 before I'm even getting to Jordan Love, before I'm even getting to the receiver position, because just how far they've come, how far they've progressed, and how comfortable they look. The 2-minute drill on Tuesday with the first team offense, I think, was just a perfect example of that. There wasn't anything flashy from them, but it was Jordan Love knowing where to go, knowing where his receivers were going to be, the receivers knowing how to create that separation. And it was 8-yard pass, 9-yard pass, 10-yard pass, all the way down into field goal range that they were able to convert. And again, that's not flashy, but it gets the job done. And I think just those simple plays goes to show how far this group has come. And we saw it last year, the ability to mix and match, but especially in these practices, as they're rotating guys more heavily because they want to get them their reps, you really see that ability and just the different skill sets out there. I mean, one formation, they had Bo Melton, Jaden Reed, and Dontavian Wicks out there. I mean, just a super fun trio where, I mean, if you're Matt LaFleur, you can do whatever you want from a play caller perspective.
Right.
So that's been really fun to see as well.
Then let's look at the tight end group, and let's include Henry Pearson here. I know they list him as a fullback, but I got to think, much like they did the few times he saw the field last year, he's really their move tight end at the moment. I know there's been talk about possibly moving AJ Dillon there, though I don't know how realistic that is. But you look at this group, and obviously with Musgrave and Kraft going into year 2, that's your kind of dynamic duo, so to speak. But I'm very interested to see how Pearson kind of fits. I think they were really kind of starting to utilize him that middle point of last year. You look at that Kansas City game, you look at the Detroit game, like he was their move guy. And from what I've read and seen from updates at practice, it sounds like Pearson's kind of picking up right in that spot.
Yeah, absolutely. They're moving him all over. He's playing in line. He's playing in the backfield. And Tyler Davis is still recovering from the ACL injury. Obviously, Tucker Kraft has been out. So he's the third tight end on the roster right now. And the Kraft not being out there has given Pearson the opportunity to go out there and get those starter reps. And it's a small sample size, even going back to what we saw from him last summer. But he was a tight end in college, asked to block a lot. But that small sample size, we've seen him being reliable as a pass catcher, very capable, very willing, knows what he has to do as a blocker. And that tight end room as a whole is really interesting because obviously we know, Kraft, Musgrave are going to be leading the way. There's Ben Sims, who is their primary blocking tight end, Henry Pearson, the move tight end, and then Tyler Davis. I mean, last summer, Rich Bisaccia called him the right hand. They lost their right hand on special teams. So we can't overlook that aspect of it either. Right. So this could be a tight end position for the Packers where maybe they end up going heavy and keeping 5, or there's going to have to be a tough decision that's made down the road.
And then we get to the offensive line. All right, Paul, when I was on the beat, I remember I hated, and I'm underlining and italicizing, hated every practice having to keep track of not just like the first team, okay, was usually pretty set, right? But then like trying to figure out who was playing where, and you would like walk up and down the sideline with the media and like, okay, who was that left guard? Like whatever. And this year, even from these 3 OTA practices, that feels so even more ramped up, even with the starters, as far as trying to keep track of who's playing where. They've moved everybody around. I mean, the only guy I can really think of who hasn't bounced around from the reports I've seen is Josh Myers. But outside of that, it feels like a lot of guys are playing a lot of different places.
Yeah, it's musical chairs, and they're throwing Jordan Morgan right into the mix. I mean, he's been left tackle, right tackle, both guard positions already. And, there's obviously a feeling out process, a learning curve here for Jordan Morgan, not only the playbook, the speed of the NFL, but now he's going from being just a left tackle to the right side of the line to playing the interior. Like, they are throwing a ton at him. But as we've seen with other rookies, the Packers aren't going to do that just for the sake of doing it. Like, they do it. They're doing it right now because they believe Morgan can handle it. And he talks about in the locker room how there's that extra prep work, the mental reps, staying on the practice field later to make sure that he knows, his specific role, where he is. So there's a lot of extra work going in behind the scenes from Morgan's perspective. And while Morgan's learning all that, the Packers are doing the same with him. They're trying to figure out where he fits best for the collective five. And when we talk about that best five, as Matt LaFleur always brings up, you might not always have each player in where they're the best. It's going to be where the collective unit is the best. And so that's what they're trying to figure out right now with Jordan Morgan, who's being bounced around. I've even seen Sean Ryan taking some snaps at center. They got Andre Dillard in there with the starters, with Zach Tom out. So they're feeling out things right now. And one other thing I'll say on the offensive line, I keep going back to this phrase, but don't forget about Rasheed Walker. He is as confident as he's ever been. Matt LaFleur spoke very, very highly of how he's approached this offseason. Obviously, there's, different pass players can go down if they feel that their replacement has been added to the roster, but he's embraced it. He's embraced the challenge, and he's been at left tackle. He's been the starting left tackle. If Morgan's played left tackle, it's been with the second unit. So in the early going here, and that's expected. He's the returning starter. Right. But in the early going here, that left tackle spot is very much Rasheed Walker's.
Okay, one last thing on the offensive line. Paul, don't let me down here. Is Royce Newman on this roster opening week?
I think so.
Oh, Paul! Killing me, man. You're killing me.
I think the experience, the ability, we've seen, you don't want to be able to throw him in as a starter, but if it's the third quarter and you need someone to go in to take over at right guard, you can
throw him in there and get 20 snaps.
And I think there's value in that.
I think Steno loves him. Like, for whatever reason, that's just the vibe I get. And I just think like there's going to be a nuclear holocaust. We're all going to be like trying to like scratch off a living from rocks, and Royce Newman's going to be lining up at right guard. Like, that's just how it's going to work.
And when we look at like the depth of the offensive line, like, it's the tackle spots. Like, they came into this offseason with Elton Jenkins, Royce Newman, and Sean Ryan as their guards. Like, that was it. Like, that interior spot is where they need the depth.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's, you're right. It probably ends up keeping him around. Let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. Let's look at the edge group, your defensive ends, now that we're playing a 4-3 there in Green Bay. Is it weird to see? I mean, I don't even know how much you guys have seen as far as, Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, et cetera, with their hands in the dirt. Are you seeing that a lot? Is that prevalent, or has it been a bit of both, like them hand down, standing up?
There's a mixture, but it's mostly with their hand in the dirt, which is definitely a shift. And I don't know what it is, but I know the Packers posted a picture on their Twitter account of Gary with his hand in the dirt. It just looks way more intimidating, at least from my perspective.
I hear you, right?
But that defensive end group and just the defensive front as a whole for a second, like Jason Rebrovich said, this is an attacking one gap system. We look at what they were asked to do in Joe Barry's defense, and several of the defenders have spoken about this. That was more of a read and react approach. You're responsible for two gaps. What's the offense line doing? What's the backfield doing? Which gap's the most vulnerable? That's what I got to defend. This, get north and south as quick as you can. It's get into the backfield. And so we're seeing that that approach from the defensive front, and that hopefully leads to just a more disruptive unit as a whole. And Brenton Cox right now is getting worked into that rotation as well. I know it's a name that's on the radar of many
I'm glad you
Packers.
brought him up. I saw Wes Hodkiewicz tweet out something from, I think, was it this week's practice or maybe last week's, about how he had a good day. And it was funny because that's a name that you heard a lot last summer, right? He had a really good camp, certainly had a decent preseason, and then just couldn't crack the game day roster throughout the year. And you look at the switch of the scheme and what have you, and you wonder maybe that helps him or turns a light on for him to help him even kind of not only continue to develop, but maybe get some more opportunities. Because, like I said, you saw last year, I thought he showed real promise.
He definitely did during the summer. And I think just given the depth that they have of that edge rusher position, I think even this year, even if he takes a step, it's going to be tough. It's Preston
Yeah.
Smith, Rashawn Gary, Van Ness, and Ine Bari, who again, Matt LaFleur spoke very highly of, but he's consistently been that fifth guy in that rotation where obviously with the players ahead of him, that's where you'd expect him to be. But it's just about, as we all know, that second season on building upon. You've been there, new system, but you've been in the NFL, the play speed, all of that. You're expected to take that jump at that point. And I think this system is really going to benefit Lucas Van Ness. I mean, we look back at his time in Iowa. He spent more time with his hand in the dirt than he did as a stand-up edge rusher, which he was asked to do last season. And Revrovich talked about last year how there was that learning curve for him from a processing standpoint, and having a counter to your initial pass rush when the offensive line is able to stop you, and we saw him start to pick up steam towards the end of the season. So I think that's going to be a good jumping off point for him. And I think just what he's being asked to do, the familiarity of the hand in the dirt, hey, just go get in the backfield. I think he's someone, who could really benefit from this defensive shift as a whole.
Then we go into the interior of things, and you look at Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt. Man, I know people are really gassing up Carl Brooks for good reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
We saw how effective he was his rookie year. Certainly think what you're talking about here, as far as being asked to just get upfield, attack that gap, I think that suits him well. And I do expect him to kind of take that step, right? I think he is going to be a force. But, man, I hope people haven't forgotten about Colby Wooden. I think, no, did he flash as much as Brooks last season? Probably not, but I still think there's a lot of upside there. And I know he's a bit buried on the depth chart, but I think, on a defense where I would suspect, and I don't know how much they will end up doing this, but it's a new staff and we don't really have much to go on. I think they're going to want to rotate those guys throughout the game up front, especially to keep them fresh, send waves after the quarterback. And I think Wooden's got a chance to make some noise there.
Yeah, I was going to go down that path with the rotations. When you're playing this one gap style, it is, and Kenny Clark talked about this, it is 100 miles an hour. Like I said, get upfield, north and south, every single play. So to stay fresh throughout the course of the game, they're going to have to be rotated more often. So I think that's going to be another shift that we see with this defense. And that's going to mean more opportunities for Colby Wooden. He's put on about 12-ish pounds, I think he said, over the offseason, focusing on yoga and strength training, said it's going to better suit him for this role. And again, it's OTAs. There's been, I think it was the second practice where Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith weren't present, so they're a bit short at defensive end. But we've seen Colby Wooden for 2 weeks now getting some reps there as well. So when there's more continuity, so to speak, from the D tackles to the D ends in the system in terms of what they're asked to do. So I'm curious to see if that leads to more moving around in terms of the rotation on the field. But Matt LaFleur talked about it on Tuesday, how much he likes the depth that they have up front. And ideally, if you're the Packers, you want a almost hockey line rotation where it's
Exactly.
4 in, and you just keep cycling those rotations in and out. And when you have that depth from Hafley's perspective, you can be picky, you can be choosy in terms of your matchups, and not always just having these guys out here, well, because we got to rely on these 2 or 3. It's like, all right, here's the opponent, here's the game plan, here's the situation, Brooks, Wood, and whoever it might be, this suits them best. Let's get them out there on these downs. So I feel like there's just a lot of flexibility, added flexibility that Hafley's going to have.
I love that. And it kind of reminds me, it's not at this level because I think that this squad was a lot more talented and had a lot kind of more premium players, but the Eagles won their Super Bowl doing exactly that on defense, as far as sending of just a wave after wave of guys up front who were continuously fresh and able to get upfield and after the quarterback. They caused so much disruption. And that, to your point, is the idea as far as being able to kind of match up up front. Like you think of corners matching up and safeties taking, guys out of the backfield or whatever, but you can start to play matchups with your front. I love this idea. I really hope we see that continue to come to fruition. Then looking at the linebacker spot, you mentioned Edrian Cooper at the start there. Clearly, we got to expect we'll see a bunch of Quay Walker and Edrian Cooper. How much 3 linebacker stuff have you seen? We've talked a lot this offseason about the quote 4-3, but we know they're in nickel or some variation of nickel most of the time. So how much 3 linebacker stuff have you seen, and who's been the third linebacker?
Yeah, so they've been opening their 11-on-11 drills in their 4-3 base, but they've definitely been in nickel, which is, like you said, what the game is going to be like far more often. But when they've been in 4-3, it's been Quay Walker in the middle, Isaiah McDuffie to his left, and Eric Wilson to his right side. And part of that, when they go to nickel, we've seen a lot more of Cooper being paired with Quay Walker in those instances. But as they've gone through these OTAs, all of these rookies from Morgan, Bullard, Cooper, Williams, they haven't necessarily just been thrown in. You're a first round pick, you're a second round pick, go out with the starters. On one side of the field, they have the starters predominantly. And then on the other side of the field, there's the second string, third string guys. And during the first OTA practice, the rookies were on that end for the most part. During the second practice, there was a mixture on both sides of the field. And this third one was where we saw Bullard, Williams, Cooper, I think I'll spend all their time down there with the starter. So there's been an easing in process to this. So just because Eric Wilson is the third linebacker right now in the 4-3 obviously doesn't mean that that's how things are going to play out once we get into training camp in the preseason. Cooper, again, has seen his fair share of snaps with the starters, but it's specifically been in nickel.
I love it. And then you started mentioning a number of the safeties there. Obviously, there was an influx due to the draft at that position. So let's look at the safety group. Obviously, McKinney is the big kind of headliner as far as the offseason acquisition. What's that rotation been like? I mean, I know we've heard about Bullard playing up kind of near the line in some of the big nickel situations, but what's the rotation been like, and who have you seen the most of?
So this last practice, again, was the first time where Bullard and Williams were fully on that side of the field. Otherwise, it's been Xavier McKinney and Anthony Johnson getting a lot of those reps. But I loved this last practice because we got to see the versatility and just the movement of that unit on full display. I mean, from play to play, Bullard, McKinney, and Williams, they were in different parts of the field. Bullard was in the slot, free safety, the other two free safety in the box. And there was a ton of late movement, post-snap movement from them where they're just sprinting to new parts of the field. So obviously from the quarterback perspective, you look up, the safeties are in one spot, you get to your drop, and they're in completely different spots. We saw a lot of 3 safety looks as well. All 3 of those players on the field together for some big nickel looks during Tuesday's practice. So that was the first example where we really got to see that interchangeability. I mean, that was the go-to word for Brian Gutekunst all offseason when talking about the safety position. And that was on full display. And it was super, super fun to watch. That's got me really excited to see this defense going into training camp and into the regular season, because it's just so different from what we've grown accustomed to.
Yeah,
and
2 safeties lined up in the parking lot every down. Yeah, it would be a little more fun.
And
I
just
think,
the skill sets, the abilities that these guys bring. And last thing I'll say, as good as we know McKinney is on the field, rave reviews off the field, just who he is every day, his leadership ability. I mean, being in that locker room around him, around his teammates, you would think he's been here 4 years. Like he is just embedded in that locker room, a part of that team. As Matt LaFleur said, he's that dude. He is just that guy on the field and off. I mean, just a terrific all-around addition to this Packers team.
And then finally on the defensive side, we look at the corner spot. Jair Alexander generating a lot of headlines for being there, something he hasn't been in the past as far as this point in the OTAs. But also, his seeming commitment and kind of buy-in, so to speak. And then, that's where you get Jair, and hopefully he's back and he's your lockdown guy, and you love that. But there's a lot of question marks after that. What have you seen from this group? I mean, we've spent the offseason kind of talking about, the issues as far as Stokes and coming back from the injuries, and can he be the guy? You had King fall all the way to the 7th round and get taken there at the last minute by the Packers. Can he make some noise? Carrington Valentine coming off a very promising rookie year, but still inconsistent at times. What have you seen from this group so far through OTAs?
In the early going, Eric Stokes has been cornerback 2 opposite of Jair Alexander. And as far as Carrington Valentine, he looks bigger coming out of this offseason. Like he packed on some muscle. And I think Derek Ansley, the pass game coordinator on defense, talked about that as well. So he looks a lot different. You can see it in him physically. But you're right. There's question marks. I mean, Eric Stokes, the last time we saw him was the first half of the 2022 season during extended time, and he was struggling.
Yep.
And I think that is an example of we can't sit here and expect, or it can't be guaranteed, so to speak, that Carrington Valentine's going to make that leap either, because Stokes was coming off of an impressive rookie season of his own. But the fact that, Jair Alexander, is hopefully back on track to playing at that all pro level. I mean, that right there takes away a lot of the unknowns at the position when you can count on that caliber of player on one half of the field. There's also the addition of Xavier McKinney at the safety position. I mean, his presence alone and what he's asked to do, there's a gravity about him in terms of his ability he's a force multiplier. He's going to impact the players around him, which is going to help the cornerback position and just Hafley's defense in general. I mean, moving away from the individual players, as we know, at the end of the day, they got to go out there and make the plays, but his more press man approach, and not that there's not going to be zone. There's obviously going to be that. It's the NFL in today's game, but that style of defense, I think, better suits the skill sets of what the Packers have. The vision-based approach that Hafley's implementing has hopefully going to lead to more ball production with this defense needs. And it doesn't matter, past players, Richard Sherman, among them, have praised Hafley for his ability as a teacher and his ability to just let the guys go out there and make plays, be aggressive, react, don't overthink. And so I think a lot of those aspects that take place in the film room and the preparation, the game plan approach beforehand are going to hopefully help do some of the heavy lifting and helping that cornerback room get back on track.
One last thing on the corners, because we haven't mentioned him, and there was so much kind of talk heading into the offseason about whether they'd bring him back or not, and they did. How much has Keyshawn Nixon played in the slot so far? Because it seems like from the updates of practice, obviously nothing's kind of complete, but I don't hear his name a whole lot, but I'm sure he's out there. What have you seen from Keyshawn so far?
Yeah, he's been dominating the slot snaps up to this point. Like I said earlier, this last practice was the first one where we saw Bullard fully worked into 11 on 11s on the starter side of the field. And so he took a few of the slot snaps during those walkthrough drills, but Keyshawn Nixon, he's dominated that role. If I were to guess right now, I think he's going to be their prominent nickel cornerback. There's going to be times, depending on situations, matchups, all of that stuff, where we're going to see Bullard play there, or we're going to see McKinney play there. But my guess right now is Nixon, we're going to get to the end of the season, and he's still going to have the majority of those snaps.
And then we look at the specialists. Yes. I'm not going to talk about long snappers because God knows I'm not ready for all that life. But kickers, we got 3 of them in OTA, and they've kept all 3. I thought maybe there was a possibility they'd get into this kind of part of OTA practices and maybe they'd let one go and they just have the 2 guys kind of duke it out, so to speak. But no, all 3 of them kicking it. It sounds like the guys had a good outing there this last practice, this third OTA practice.
Yeah, the third, or this last practice, was the first one where we saw all 3 of them kicking together. They've been doing a 2-man rotation just to make sure each of them gets the new reps, and each practice a new kicker sits out. But all 3 of them went this week. Matt LaFleur said it's apples to apples, the best way to get the same comparison, because they're kicking in the same environment, same conditions. As far as a comparison standpoint. And I thought for all 3 of them, all around, it was their best performance. Podlesny was 5 of 7. Joseph and Carlson were 6 of 7. It was really fun. They ended practice because the week before, Matt LaFleur said, each kicker's had his day. They're not going to really know until the intensity gets cranked up. So I guess as best you can here in early June, LaFleur tried to do that, where they each had a 53-yard attempt and their teammates were huddled around them. And I mean, probably 3-4 feet at most on each side of them, yelling, waving towels, throwing water up in the air. The music got cranked up even louder just to try to crank up the intensity a little bit. Joseph and Podlesny each would miss their kick. Carlson would make his. And one quick note on Carlson. I mean, he has fully embraced this competition, and coming out of the off season, as he was reflecting on last season, how it went, there was a bit of optimism in the sense that his misses he had identified were all pretty similar. They were to the left when the wind was coming in from the right. So in terms of fixing that, it's easier to hone in on one specific thing versus if he's missing left, missing right. And look at his brother, Daniel Carlson. Obviously, it's not a given that he's going to rebound, but having someone, and he worked out with him this offseason, that you're that close with, who went through similar struggles, was released by the Vikings, caught on with the Raiders, and Versatility has turned into a very reliable kicker. Again, I go back to the same thing, but let's not forget about Anders Carlson in all of this either. And from the Packers' perspective, that's who you want to win this.
I was gonna say, I mean, it very much feels like, okay, we've brought in competition because that's what was necessary to continue to develop the guy they drafted. Like, they want him to win this gig. I mean, I think that's pretty clear.
Oh, 100%. Not even just from an investment standpoint, but you look at upside potential.
Right.
A year two player like Greg Joseph, we know what he is at this point. He's been really, really solid under 40 yards. He struggled from 40 plus deep. Jack Podlesny is a complete unknown at this point, not being able to stick with a team last season. Like, not just from an investment standpoint, but a long-term perspective of your kicker position and just having that stability that Mason Crosby brought for so many years. You want Anders Carlson to win this competition.
Well, Paul, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your insight here. Boots on the ground, so to speak, there in Green Bay throughout the offseason. And now we got mini camp next week, 3 days. One of those days will get canceled. They'll do some paintball nonsense or whatever. And then it'll be training camp. And I'll see you in Green Bay. I'm really looking forward to it. Paul, thank you so much for the time, man.
I appreciate it as always, Aaron. Thank you.